Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the fourth quarterly meeting of the Global Action Hub on Waste, Methane, and Environmental Justice. My name is Sonia Sudilio Gaya, Global Climate Communications Officer. We are recording this meeting for documentation and to allow people who can't join at the last minute to get access to this call. But before we get started, let us go over some housekeeping rules. First one, this space has translation service available in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Click the language button at the bottom of your Zoom. And to get to know you, please change your display name to your name, organization, and country where you're based in. So example, Mariel Vilea, Gaia, UK. We have several panel speakers today. Please use the chat box to send your questions anytime during the presentation. If time allows, we can also unmute some of you to ask your questions directly. We have technical support available named as Gaia Tech Support. Please reach out directly via direct message if you're having technical issues. But most important, stay present, engage, contribute, assuming the best intention in everyone. Now I'd like to turn you over to Makavena Mavroski, Program Manager of the Zero Waste Cities Global Program at Gaia, who will be moderating this session. Maka.
Thank you, Sonia. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I want to briefly introduce the space and give an agenda for this call. For those joining for the first time, I just want to briefly introduce Gaia as the facilitator of this space. Gaia is the largest global alliance of civil society organizations focusing on waste, climate, and environmental justice, working with national and regional alliances representing more than 1,000 organizations from 100 countries. Many of our members are deeply engaged in promoting and implementing zero waste as a climate solution. In recent years, momentum has grown at the intersection of waste and climate, especially since the Global Methane Pledge launched at COP26, followed by the Low Methane Partnership at COP28, and the Reducing Organic Waste Declaration at COP29. This momentum continuously grows the political and financial interest in cutting waste methane. As Gaia, we emphasized that actions must align with environmental justice to ensure both emission reductions and equitable benefits for all, and most importantly, leaving no one behind. And this is why we opened a space to discuss waste methane and environmental justice. This is one of our strategic priorities, organizing and advocating for waste methane reduction with environmental justice. For those joining the Hub for the first time, I want to reintroduce this space. The Global Action Hub is an online space to collectively assess, address, and celebrate the advancements of waste methane with environmental justice and support the implementation of the Global Methane Pledge in alignment with environmental justice principles. Gaia has been the facilitator of this quarterly space since September 2024, an open space to support all those working to this agenda and share expertise, strategize, celebrate, and ultimately hold an accountability space for environmental justice in the intersection between waste and climate. Today, we will begin with a presentation from the Climate Policy Initiative, who will share the results of a recently published report on financial analysis of solid waste management business models that features case studies from Gaia members in Brazil and Indonesia. This report aims to explore how we can scale up finance for organic waste management systems in ways that align with environmental justice. We will also have the honor to hear about another new report, Making Sense of Composting, a municipal savings model for diverting organic waste from landfill by Groundwork, Lumen, and Durban University of Technology. To talk about this, we've invited speakers from different sectors who will share the challenges and opportunities they see from their own perspective when it comes to financing the scale up of organic waste management systems. Here you will also have the chance to ask your own questions through the chat box. To dive deeper, we'll then move into breakout groups where we want to hear from you, your experiences, ideas, and reflections on how we can collectively tackle this issue. To get the meeting started, I'd like to turn over to Yovel Putra, Climate Program Officer at Gaia, who will be moderating this session.
Thank you, Maka, and thank you everyone for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's been great to see you, familiar faces from the previous call, but also new faces. So, as Maka said, towards COP30, we know that finance implementation, finance, also just transition, are some of the key factors in achieving our climate goals. And therefore, it's critical to understand what are the key barriers to shift finance to the right interventions that support implementation on the ground. And therefore, let's move to the first part of our agenda, a presentation by the Climate Policy Initiative. We have Tiza here. As a context, this report was commissioned by Gaia to the CPI in collaboration with two key partners, Gaia members, Police Institute from Brazil and YPB from Indonesia. And the intention behind this project was really to get a better understanding on how we can mobilize and direct financial resources to effectively scale up zero-waste systems while ensuring that environmental justice stays at the center, meaning the people who are getting the implementation and also people who are possibly getting affected. And we're very happy to have Tiza Mafira, Director of the Climate Policy Initiative, with us today to present the report. Tiza will walk us through the key findings and recommendations from the report that will help us understand what are these barriers, how to overcome it, and also how to scale justice-centered waste management projects, especially on organics. So Tiza, you'll have 10 minutes. Over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Yobel. Hi, everyone. I am representing Climate Policy Initiative, and we just launched a study together with Gaia. Maybe next slide, you can see, right. So this study called Financial Analysis of Solid Waste Management Business Models. It's available on the Climate Policy Initiative website as well as the Gaia website. You can already download it as of about 2 days ago, and the link is available on the chat. We were really excited to do this report. Climate Policy Initiative is a research organization and advisory that focuses on climate finance. So it was really exciting for us to be able to deep dive into specifically methane finance, but specifically how communities that have been doing zero waste have contributed to methane reduction, and what their business models are like, and whether they are financially viable, right? So the next slide shows how, shows how the reason why we did this is because in earlier study done by CPI that looked at methane finance globally, we found that organic waste projects attracted only about 1% of global methane abatement investment, and about 94% of the finance was directed to waste to energy incinerator assets. And we know that waste to energy facilities are still greenhouse gas intensive. And so this seems like a missed opportunity to only have 1% of finance directed towards more upstream organic waste projects. So we looked at those upstream projects. We looked at the Zero Waste Cities projects. And we collected data together with YPBB in Bandung and Polis in Brazil. We looked at 7 samples in Bandung, 3 business models there. And we looked at 9 samples in Brazil where they had 4 different business models. Next slide. And of course, when we're talking about funding, the main issue, or maybe the most popularly known issue, is that there's not enough municipal city funding. There's not enough public funding from the government budgets to cover proper waste management. And basically the data confirms that in Indonesia, solid waste management it only makes up about 1 to 3% of the city budget. And in Brazil, it was only 2 to 5% of municipal budgets. So clearly, public budget isn't enough. What we wanted to see is whether or not there were business models that could attract funding apart from relying on municipal government subsidies. Next slide. So we looked at the CapEx, we looked at their operating expenses, and in terms of operating expenses, we found some interesting findings among the business models that we found. So we looked at not just private sector models, we looked at public sector models, which means that these are zero waste initiatives or organic waste management initiatives by the city government, by private corporations, as well as by communities and cooperatives. So we looked at a whole spectrum of business models. And if you look to the left, the dots that are small but a bit high shows that if it's a small dot, it means that they don't actually manage a big volume of waste. But if the dot is high on the chart, it means that their operating expenses per ton are quite high. So $51, $50 for a small amount of waste is quite expensive, but that's because they're small scale. So you would expect that the price goes down as they scale up, which is true. But what's interesting here is that when they scale up really, really big, like the large blue dot on the right, which is a public entity in Brazil, it gets really expensive, even though they manage a lot of waste. And the reason for that is because they are centralized. They're transporting organic waste from far across, from locations across the city, and the transportation costs are huge, and that is why it becomes expensive. So there's actually a sweet spot in the middle where the waste managed is quite a large volume, but the operating expenses is not that big. And that is with community cooperatives in Brazil. And we found cases of public management, public business models in Bandung as well, that followed this kind of sweet spot because they're decentralized, they're closer to the source, they have less transportation costs and less land acquisition costs. And we'll see a little bit more of this as we move along the slide. So next slide. So what we found is that the highest cost for capital expenditure is land. Land contributes to the most cost for CapEx, indicating that this is a major barrier to entry, but for industrial players who are looking to have large-scale composting facilities, it's less of a barrier for home composting. So the closer that it is to the source, the home, the less that you need a big amount of land, actually your CapEx needs goes down. The next slide shows OpEx needs, which is operational expenditure. And the largest component of OpEx is labor costs. That is the bulk of operating costs. And that indicates that organic solid waste management is labor intensive. No surprise there. But also what this means is that it has potential to create jobs. And so the focus for financing needs to be on how to finance the operational costs, because that's the one that creates the co-benefits of generating jobs for communities. Next slide. And we found that community group models and public home composting can be cost competitive, even when you compare them with private companies and public facilities, they can be cost competitive. We looked at government-operated and community group models in Indonesia. Their prices, their costs for the levelized cost of waste management averaged out over the same amount of years was competitive with each other. And if you look at the bottom row, some of these models were even more cost competitive than a large incinerator, for example. And similarly in Brazil, we found that some waste picker cooperatives and public sector home composting models were actually even more cost competitive than some government operated and private sector companies. So in terms of efficiency and cost competitiveness, Actually, community group models and public home business models are, they make sense economically. Next slide. And the other finding that we thought was interesting was that different business models, they'll yield different returns, but there's cost savings associated with diverting organic waste from landfill. And these cost savings are significant, they're attractive. If you look at the bar in Brazil on the right, there's a green bar that indicates savings, right? And the green bar is pretty high. But you don't see the same in Indonesia because it's simply not quantified in Indonesia by municipal cities in Indonesia. So one of the findings that we highlighted from the study is the need to quantify savings from diverting waste from landfill, because once you add that into the calculation, immediately your financial viability goes up. And it is a significant amount which needs to be quantified. Next slide. Great. So we want to highlight the co-benefits, not just kind of the revenue models, not just the cost savings, but also the additional co-benefits of organic waste treatment value, which is that it creates jobs. There's a social benefit that we found where there's a distribution of benefits from products generated, such as compost and urban farming. There's obviously a health benefit and an environmental benefit. And all of these co-benefits put together create an added value for the viability and the financiability of the project. And the last slide, next slide, just to close off, are some key takeaways, which is that when it comes to financing, if you're designing your intervention closer to the source, it reduces the main cost, which is land and transportation. But the interventions that are closer to the source are smaller in size. They're less likely to attract large-scale financing. So we still continue to need grants to help that early stage design of community business models. Yes, they are cost competitive, but in order to attract the right kind of finance, you have to attract the financiers that are willing to finance small size, early stage business models. And those are mostly in the form of grants at the moment. Could multilateral development banks fund these types of things? Maybe, but they would have to be bundled together as a public infrastructure. It would have to be a bundle of, several projects or a chain of government-owned, community-operated, organic solid waste management facilities. Some models of this have existed in other sectors, which we could probably replicate here in this case. And in terms of community involvement, which is the column in the middle, maybe the highlight is that community group models have shown that this model not only empowers communities and creates job opportunities and abates methane, but it can also be cost competitive, as demonstrated by the many case studies that we found in Indonesia and Brazil. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiza. It's very insightful. It's very exciting. And I think the fact that this report covers two different places in Brazil and Indonesia and the global south, and very distinct model with waste picker cooperatives, even home composting with public funds, and also the community-based. It tells me that we really need to get more financing to these models that are already there. There are some caveat on how to, like you said, bundle it, on how MDB should look at it and then make the instruments that work. But I think the learning is important for policymakers as well and other financiers, especially knowing that the policy and project design process, it's important to incorporate this consideration, especially in global south countries, where there are a lot of these groups, cooperatives, implementing decentralized systems now. They are looking at as close as possible, even home composting, but still they receive not so much financing. And I also note that it's very important to quantify co-benefits and cost-saving potentials to tell the whole story and the potential of organic waste management model. So thank you, Tiza. And I think this is a great place to move us to the learning journey from Brazil, Indonesia, and we move to South Africa. We're very happy to have three amazing speakers from Durban. Yes, we have three. We have joined us today. We have Kira, representing Groundwork, a civil society organization working on environmental justice in various fields, including the waste sector. And they're a member of Gaia. Tamlin, representing Durban University of Technology from a public university and academic perspective. And also Paul, representing LUMEC, a Durban-based economic research organization. So the three of them will present us their latest report, cost-benefit analysis, on their municipal saving organic waste diversion model in Durban. So you have 10 minutes. I'm passing the mic to whoever starts. So yeah, up to you guys.
Thank you so much, Yobel. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for having us here today. It's exciting to follow the previous speaker. If we could go to the next slide, please. We'll just give very briefly an overview of the context of where we are coming from and the model that we're going to present today is located in, which is the city of Durban, sometimes called eThekwini, which is a big municipality that we are in, and we are on the east coast of South Africa. It's a city of just under 5 million people, so it's fairly large and characterized by a lot of informal work. In fact, the majority of the work in our city is informal. A lot of the work is also found with informal street markets, fresh fruit and veg markets run by the city, but spills into a huge informal market that feeds the majority of people in our city. It can have around 400,000 foot traffic through this area a day because it's linked into a huge transport hub. So when we were starting to do a zero waste project, it was important for us that we had to do a project that included informal workers, that worked with their processes, that supported the work that they did. And secondly, that the solutions were offered to the municipality and working with the municipality for low resource solutions. In other words, a much more frugal way of thinking. We were not interested at this point in exploring big technical solutions that would tie our municipality into long-term contracts or have expensive maintenance around machinery. The municipality at the moment is stretched in terms of resources and also stretched in the sense that it currently cannot service in its waste management unit our entire population. So it's important that we get creative, innovative, working with people, working with the issue of environmental justice to think through zero waste. And I'm going to hand over to Karen, who's going to give a sense of how the model works.
Yeah, thanks, Kira, and hi, everyone. If we can jump to the next slide, please. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just giving a quick history of our model and just explaining to you guys how we got to this point. So you can see on the slide there, the status quo before we implemented this model. We had 9 fresh produce markets spatially spread out across the city, generating huge volumes of organic waste, no separation at source happening, and this waste being transported significant distances to the last remaining landfill. So not efficient at all. You know, huge fuel costs, a lot of strain on infrastructure, and a lot of emissions from the trucks. So what we began doing was looking at partnerships and looking at how we could do something different. So we started in one inner city market to start with. We worked with waste pickers to do a granular audit of waste in that market. So we had a strong data set and a strong sense of the waste that was being generated. And then we partnered with different stakeholders. And in our city, we partnered with the market managers, business support units, our parks department, and our waste management unit. And we started looking for sites to compost that were really close by. So exactly what Tiza is saying, proximity is key. It's king for saving costs and saving the planet. So for this first site, we found a parks space that was less than 2 kilometers away. We moved the waste to that site, composted it with garden waste that would otherwise be going to landfill, produced this compost, and then gave it back to the city for free. So what we were doing here is really just starting small and scaling up incrementally. So if you can jump to the next slide, because I think some of these, the things that I'm saying touch on the next slide as well, on how we went about this. So what we've done subsequently, I mean, at the start, we were just taking one wheelie bin of waste from the market and making compost. And at the moment in this site, we're now transporting tons of waste 3 times a week. And that groundwork was important, although it took a long time. When we replicated the model now in our second market, from start to finish, we actually got that right in 4 months. So it shows, I think that was one of our biggest lessons, is to start small, get the operations right, get the relationships right, and then you can move quite quickly. You can almost scale up exponentially when you've got that foundation. So identifying the site, there's a lot of different criteria, but yes, definitely the transport costs are significant. So you want to get your composting close to where waste is generated. Cannot underestimate the value of the data. It was this data that we collect rigorously, systematically, that we gave to Paul to really package this into a financial argument. And that for us was the most powerful, because that's when the city officials sat up and took notice of what we were doing. And that resulted directly in us getting an MOU with the city. And we've got that in place now to support the scale up of this model across all 9 markets. So yes, partnerships are key, bringing new people on board and sharing learnings, documenting everything, reflecting. And then being creative. So Kira was talking about thinking out the box. And I mean, we could do a whole nother presentation on creative methods that we've used in this study, in this project. But where it's been really powerful in our model is working with informal workers in these markets to get separation at source right, because that was also something we had to do right at the start so that we could get this uncontaminated organics to compost. So I think I'll hand over to Paul now, who's going to go into the cost-benefit analysis in a little bit more detail. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks so much, Tam. So yeah, I think building on what has been kind of contextualized by Kira and Tam, when we took this project ultimately to the municipality, they wanted to understand what this meant for them in the end of the day. So they even specifically said we would like to see a cost-benefit analysis. And just briefly, what a cost-benefit analysis is that it compares all the costs and all the benefits of a project or a range of projects compared to the status quo. So what's currently happening and what are the other projects that could happen, to understand what the net benefit is to society. So one reason I really enjoy cost-benefit analysis studies in this space is that they allow you to include external costs. So the negative externalities of landfilling or the savings on greenhouse gas emissions, those kind of costs that are not usually built into the costs of a normal economic assessment can be built in. And that's what we did in this cost-benefit analysis. So ultimately, we didn't just look at the monetary costs, we looked at what some of those other benefits and savings are to the municipality. So within the context of this project, our cost-benefit analysis was aiming to look at the costs and benefits of diverting organic waste, so food and garden waste, from landfill into compost production to determine if there's a net benefit or cost to the municipality of doing this project. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our first step was actually trying to identify what the main costs and benefits are. So we looked at the status quo, which was sending all of this waste to landfill, and what some of the main costs there were the costs of removing the waste from the markets and sending it to landfill. And as Kira said, it's a long trip to landfill, and essentially there's a lot of cost associated with that. There's actually not only the waste management costs, there's also the costs of the municipality performing the landfilling function. So the transport of the municipality on municipal waste vehicles, the operational costs, the capital costs. There's a per ton cost of sending waste to landfill. So we ultimately looked at all those costs, the greenhouse gas emission costs for the status quo, and what you'll see is that those become benefits in the diversion case. So if we can divert this waste from landfill, we're saving the markets on that amount that they spend on sending waste to landfill. We're saving the landfill costs because the municipality now doesn't have to transport that waste to landfill. They don't have to perform landfill-related operations for that. And there's greenhouse gas emission savings, for example. There are some costs to the alternative, which is transporting our waste from the market to where we do the compost, and obviously the machinery, the equipment, the labor, and the other costs of producing compost. So that was essentially the costs and the benefits and the starting point. And then you'll see in terms of the findings in the next slide, that the status quo, as I didn't mention, but the status quo doesn't actually have any core benefits. So in the status quo, that dark green line at the top, about just over 3 million rand per year is spent essentially disposing of all of this waste to landfill, as well as greenhouse gas emission costs. And we factored in social disamenities, so some of the nuisances to local communities. And you can see that that's about 3-point-something million rand a year. The benefits of the alternative, which is diversion, is about the same. It's about 3.2 million per year. And a big chunk of that is the savings in disposal fees for the municipality. So you'll see about 1.3 million rand per year is spent on parks and markets in sending waste to landfill. Another 1.3 million is spent by the waste department in landfilling, plus about 300,000 that can be saved in compost purchases. So the model is quite heavily driven by the fact that waste disposal fees and the municipality's landfilling costs are relatively high, and that generates a lot of benefits. And you can also see there that we generate about 7 full-time jobs and about 4 part-time jobs in diverting all of this waste. And we have a 622 tons of CO2 equivalent that's emitted, that is saved from being emitted, which translates to about 150,000 rand based on our carbon tax rates. And just for those who are not aware of the rand dollar, it's about 18 rand to $1. Next slide, please. So yeah, you can just see in summary the net benefits and the net cost of each scenario. In the status quo, about just over 3 million rand per year is spent just monitoring the status quo, maintaining the status quo. And in the alternative, the net benefit for the city kind of increases as machinery and equipment is paid off after the first few years and stabilizes at about 2 million rand per year as a net benefit to the city. Next, please. Yeah, and I think this just now summarizes the kind of overall net benefit. So a cost-benefit analysis, what it does is look at the benefits over a period of 10 years, which is the net benefit, and then it discounts those net benefits to today's value using a discount rate. So you can see the net benefit for our diversion project is about 18 million rand. So that's about $1 million. That is what will be saved by the municipality over 10 years by doing this project. And that is reduced when you bring it to today's value. It's about 10 million rand. But if we continue to do the status quo of sending that waste to landfill, it's a net cost to the city of negative 32 million rand, or about negative 18 million rand in net present value. So you can see there that, you know, if you present this as an argument to your municipality, it shows that there is definitely a benefit of investing a little bit of time and energy and some initial investment costs into a project like this. Next slide. So yeah, finally, from my side, just to note, you know, there are these financial impacts, and the savings on waste disposal and the savings of actually performing landfill operations really do drive this model from a financial perspective. And the previous speaker said that, you know, it's often not included in these kind of costings. And we included it to show the municipality that we understand that there's costs involved in these kind of initiatives, but what you're spending on sending this waste to landfill per ton is really high, and it can offset and actually fund some of these small decentralized projects. There's obviously the job creation impacts. Socioeconomically, we have a lot of spatial inequalities in South Africa, and this allows decentralized job creation. There's all the climate and environmental impacts that, we're generating or can generate 300 tons of compost. And then there's impact on the traders in the markets, institutionally across different municipal units working together, breaking silos, and lots of educational benefits of this project. Maybe just to note as a last point is that this cost benefit, Tam and the team are diverting a lot of organic waste into this composting project. But this model and this cost benefit is based on if we were to divert all of it. So it's using what we're doing, which is a lot smaller, but saying if we did this at scale, look at what we can save you as a city. And that's helped us build momentum that we've needed to keep this project going and to scale. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kira, Tamlin, and Paul.
Great.
It
I
feels...
think there's a last slide.
Oh.
Sorry, Yobal,
You have more
sorry. I will
slides.
be very, very, very quick. This is the last one. Just to say that
Yeah.
I've put the link to the report in the chat, so we'd love to hear from you when you've had a chance to read through it, everyone. And then just some exciting news that we are already in a third market, which is the bulk market in our city. By far the largest amount of tonnage going to landfill currently. And looking at replicating the model there, the research has already started. And perhaps just to end on one point, which is that certainly in our city, there's lots of discussion around how we try and privatize waste management because it is such a tricky issue. And of course, that is hitting many stumbling blocks for different reasons. We feel it's really important to keep the focus on good waste management, especially around organic waste, within the public sector. It is a public service that can be offered. And if we think through this carefully and restructure in the ways that we are suggesting around decentralized models, the core and co-benefits that are offered with it, I think, hold a lot of value for municipalities, such as ours, but many others. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Jabal. We're done.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I will just take some key takeaways that I noticed shared both in Tiza's presentation and your presentation, which is the need to quantify the benefits, not only like some benefits, but all of these beautiful benefits, and also the cost-saving potential. We need to account for it, especially when it's decentralized organics management. And I like the point that you said about being creative by shifting whatever we already have in the city to the right intervention following the waste hierarchy. And Paul also mentioned about factoring externalities, which is critical for just transition. It's also great to see that this is also happening in the case of Indonesia and Brazil. And the last 4 slides that Paul shared really reminds me of the importance of putting our time, resources, money that are unfortunately limited to the right intervention now, rather than burying or burning our waste in incinerator. Cities who are at the forefront of implementation, bore the responsibility of waste management, could save a lot of money, generate a lot of benefits for social, for the benefits of many, and also, especially when we integrate with community and former workers in the waste sector, these benefits are more apparent. So thank you so much again for CPI, Groundwork, LUMEC, and Durban University of Technology for the insightful presentation. And now this really sets the stage for us to have a conversation, a talk show style panel discussion, where we have 3 speakers from different sectors, and we'll talk about them on what are the challenges, what are the opportunities that they see when it comes to financing and scaling up organic waste management system, particularly in their own context. So now we have, I believe, 2 speakers with us, and then we are hoping the third one will join in later. We have Gerardo Canales, Director of Implementasur, Technical Coordinator of the Reciclo Orgánicos program, or Recycle Organics. Thank you for joining, Gerardo. And also we have Severino Lima Jr., or Severino, the President of the International Alliance for Waste Picker, who will share his perspective representing the global waste pickers movement and their role in implementing climate solutions, particularly on organic waste and methane in the waste sector. We're expecting Mr. Yufi Jose IAS, Director of Suciwita Mission of Government of Kerala from India, to join and give some valuable insight from the government and public perspective. But now I'll just go straight to Gerardo. I have one question for you now. You know that it was mentioned that waste management is essential public service, and financing the service has never been easy in many places of the world. And there's also conversation about financial externalities and also the difficulties to procure land and getting things running on the ground. So from your experience working on various projects in Recyclos Orgánicos, what are the main challenges that need solving here? And how to get more and even better finance for organic waste management? So if you can start sharing these thoughts, then we can continue having more conversation later. Thanks. Up to you, Gerardo.
Thank you, Joey. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Well, in terms of challenges, I think along the years we have grouped them in three: awareness and capacities, and policy frameworks, and also project development. So I will refer shortly to each of them. I think the previous presentations was great in terms of communicating the cost-benefit analysis of these projects. I think that's something that's not been done normally. And we need to be aware, we need to create awareness of the cost of inaction, right? I mean, up to now, we think that sending everything to a landfill, it's something that is harmless. Today, we know that it's not. We know there are a lot of costs associated to that. And therefore, we need to do something different. And to do something different, it's going to be more complex, because actually the solution that we have been utilizing it's very simple, right? I mean, put everything in a hole and forget about it. So I think creating that awareness of inaction is important, and I'm not referring only to authorities, but also to the citizens, right? I mean, everybody in society should know what is the cost of not disposing correctly your waste, because I think responsibilities here are for everyone. Each of us is a generator, and each of us, every time that we throw something away, we can make a decision of doing it differently from what we have been doing before. So it's not a responsibility only of the private sector or governments. I think it's each of us responsibility, and that's very important to have into consideration. Of course, good information on technology options. It's also key. I think that's a challenge today, maybe less today than before. I think there are a lot of examples in the Global South of successful projects. Every day we see new initiatives, and therefore there are more examples that are similar, closer to our reality. And I think that's encouraging a lot of people to take action on themselves. In terms of policy frameworks, of course, the climate targets need to be put down or incorporated into sectoral policies. For example, if we talk about cost-benefit analysis, incorporating the social cost of the social price of carbon, I think it's a key measure. For example, in Chile, the government has incorporated the social cost of carbon for evaluating all the public investments that the government is doing, and that already changed completely the way waste management projects are being evaluated, right? I mean, today, of course, diverting organic waste from landfills, it's a much more competitive option than what it used to be. So we need to have these climate targets, and after we have that, we need to translate those targets into emission reductions that we need and into concrete projects. I mean, we need to have an idea of how much is the effort that we need to do in order to get to those targets, and translate that into projects. I mean, how much organic waste, for instance, do we need to divert? How much is going to cost, and how long it's going to take? I think we need to think beyond 1 or 2 projects. We need to think about a portfolio that's going to take us 10, 15 years to develop, but we need to start planning for that from now. So investment plans are very important to move forward. The polluter pays principle, of course, it's something that we need to incorporate into our regulation. In most of our countries, unfortunately, just a few percentage of the population pays for disposal, for waste management treatment. we need to change that, and that's linked to the responsibility that I was talking before. Of course, some groups of the society, we can provide support, and maybe they are going to be exempt of payment, but those citizens, or those people that can afford to pay even a percentage of the cost of their waste disposal, I think we need to incorporate that into our policies. And finally, just to talk a little bit about project development, we need to support projects from the pre-investment phase all the way to their operation, right? So I think it's with so many initiatives been trying to be developed, maybe more support should be put into those initiatives, like supporting startups, supporting innovation. We need to move from a model where we only create costs to a model where we create value. So when people say, why do you want to do composting? What are you going to do with the compost? I get that question so many times, and it's surprising that how can someone think that putting organic waste in a landfill is a better idea than transforming it into something that has value and something that should always go back to the soil and create, like benefits for everyone. So I think those are some ideas, a lot of challenges, but we need to, of course, putting numbers on the analysis, putting attention on the real costs and the real benefits. It's a great starting point.
Thanks, Gerardo. I think your whole points talks a lot about what's hidden, what people don't see, what people are not aware of, and that's why we need to build awareness, right? You talk about the inaction cost, the polluters pay principle, and then also a lot about having the benefits, creating values that are often still invisible to many people, perhaps financiers as well, and governments, and we need to make a case for it to move finance to the right place and get us scaling all the organics projects in different types. I'll get back to you, so hold on. And I think it's a perfect place for us to get to Severino. And I think the question for you, Severino, is can you tell us the waste pickers' work globally in reducing waste methane emission, in dealing with organic waste? And then can you tell us more about the challenges you see on how that can get financed? So I'll just pass the floor to you, Severino.
Obrigado, Yobel. Boa tarde a todos, né? Aqui para a gente já ainda é tarde. Bom, o grande desafio é que a gente se mantém na invisibilidade, Yobel. Pouco se fala do catador, pouco se reconhece o trabalho do catador, aí se transforma tudo em números, aí se transforma em toneladas, se transforma em financeiro e esquece o trabalho do catador. A gente tem uma responsabilidade muito grande a partir do momento que assumimos a presidência da Aliança Internacional, que a gente já viajava muito, já conhecia muitos projetos bons, muitos projetos realizados por catadores ou por apoio com os catadores, e a ideia de se criar, pelo menos na parte da América Latina e mais alguns outros países, é conhecer um pouco qual é o formato de trabalho desses catadores com esse tipo de material. Todo mundo sabe que o orgânico não dá dinheiro, não é nenhum segredo saber que a dificuldade de se ter o orgânico para fazer a compostagem, nem toda municipalidade dá o suporte necessário para os catadores, e a nossa relação, nesse caso, é direto com a municipalidade ou com a comunidade que paga por esse serviço, que é o caso da Ásia, da Índia. A gente sabe que na Índia tem alguns projetos em que não tem serviço de limpeza, de coleta normal de resíduos, e aí a comunidade paga para aquele empreendimento de catadores, e eles acabam utilizando parte desse orgânico, que também é muito pouco, pela economia da Ásia e pela forma cultural que os asiáticos têm, não deixa tanto resíduo como aqui na América Latina ou em parte da África. Então, a gente está numa nuance de tentar identificar, por isso que a gente criou essa sinergia e essa oportunidade do projeto da Global Methane Hub, é para a gente ter, de fato, um estudo específico, tanto da curva MAC, não só para os orgânicos, mas também o percentual que isso pode chegar para a reciclagem, de modo geral, do papelão, que não deixa de ser um orgânico, né? O que é que isso impacta na reciclagem do plástico e de outros materiais, para poder a gente chegar numa quantificação e apresentar para os financiadores internacionais. E aí a gente está com duas demandas muito importantes, que é apresentar um estudo mais viável para essa curva MAC para pagamento do serviço ambiental, tanto na COP 30 no Brasil, quanto também alencado ao Tratado Internacional dos Plásticos, que a reunião do 5.2 do AI inicia agora em agosto. Então, a gente está correndo quanto tempo? Antes do projeto chegar, a gente já tinha aí grandes pessoas, são 4 universidades, são 3 instituições internacionais que estão nesse suporte. O governo brasileiro também está, devido a várias políticas brasileiras. Nós temos o mercado de crédito de carbono aí em pleno crescimento no Brasil, e a gente quer captar recursos a partir dessas metodologias para apresentar para a sociedade internacional um modelo mais justo, né, de reconhecimento do trabalho dos catadores e catadoras para essa questão da mitigação dos gases metanos. Um dado que eu posso passar para vocês é que eu tive agora em Turim, e nosso afiliado lá da Retiono, que tem que quantificar de 30 a 40 toneladas que chega da feira livre que a gente visitou lá para a organização, 25 toneladas eles já distribuem para as pessoas. Ou seja, ele não espera o material estragar para virar metano. Eu tenho que ter essa conta também. Eu lembro muito que as pessoas reclamavam muito quando os aterros sanitários eram transformados em grandes minas de gases que queimavam, tinha que produzir o metano para queimar, para virar os créditos de carbono, e a gente não quer isso. Então, eu preciso quantificar para uma organização como essa que o fato dela estar dando destinação a 30 toneladas de alimento que iria se virar como orgânico, aí também tem que entrar na conta aí nesse nosso processo, é isso que a gente quer quantificar, que é como apresentar uma forma de transição justa, um modelo social, economicamente social, e que reconheça o trabalho do catador. A gente não vai querer estar nos status de organizações, startups, empresas que trabalham com orgânico. Se eles estão vendendo uma tonelada a 10, a gente tem que vender no mínimo a 50. Então, a gente quer trabalhar no sentido de reconhecimento desse trabalhador que há muitos anos já fazem isso. Os catadores nos lixões recolhem material para alimentação, recolhem material para levar para fazer orgânico, de alguma forma já tem esse trabalho. E, na verdade, o que a gente busca é que esses estudos que vocês estão apresentando agora, como que a gente cataloga eles e apresenta para os nossos cooperados, para as nossas afiliadas, para poder ter uma melhor oportunidade e também melhorar a sua capacidade operativa para a destinação desse material orgânico e criar sinergia, porque precisa falar com o município, precisa falar com os grandes mercados, porque o que pode aparecer muito com esses estudos é startups querendo fazer um trabalho e bota o catador para ser simplesmente o entregador do material e não o dono do negócio ou o sócio do negócio, que a gente já está um pouco cansado de ver isso a nível internacional, que as empresas vêm, criam os meus modelos, criam as inovações tecnológicas e continuam explorando o trabalho do catador e não o reconhece como profissional, mesmo que seja de maneira informal, como se trabalha a maioria dos catadores no mundo.
Thank you, Severino. And I think your points talks about unraveling the cost, especially social cost to waste speaker. And some key words that I listen is recognition for waste speaker and get them to be paid fairly. And that's why it's important to quantify the potential of methane reduction, but not only about organic waste, because waste speaker also work for other waste streams that are often neglected. And you also touch on an important point on how collaboration and also building this understanding that a technology should not displace, or a project should not displace waste speaker. So thank you for that. And I'll get back quickly to Gerardo. Now I think it's good to talk about the solutions. And one of the problem statement you shared is about technology. Like we need to have a list of technologies and then make them as options. But often some of these technologies that are quite simple, like in Asia where I stayed, a lot of composting, home composting technology, there's a ton of them. Windrow composting, there's like a lot of variants of them. But then sometimes these technologies that often work in a relatively smaller scale, doesn't get the finance they deserve. But there's a lot that are being replicated. And even for the bigger ones, there's still challenges. So what do you think is the solutions that we need to focus on here to really get finance flowing to this range of technological and also projects?
Thank you. Well, we agree that we are in the middle of a transition, right? Basically, we want to move from one model to a different model. And in that sense, we need to adjust different variables that exist with the existing model. So again, looking at tipping fees, I think it's important. Of course, if we want, I think there is finance out there. We need good projects. In order to have good projects, we need to reduce the risk. And in that sense, we need to guarantee revenues, right? I mean, that's what any investment would look for. Because there are social benefits associated to these projects, I think the public sector has a role, and that's why public-private partnerships are an important way to get these projects running. For example, we have seen examples where the municipality is the owner of the landfill, and they invest in the infrastructure for composting, for instance, for organic waste diversion, and then they contract the operation of the whole landfill plus the composting plant to a private sector company. So in that way, you reduce the cost of investment for the private sector company, and they will be willing to come in, and of course, they will get paid for the operation. Also, you can, of course, contracts are very important. So we need to adjust contracts in a way also to promote investment. For instance, allow private sector companies that operate landfills to receive organic waste also from other sources. Particularly at the beginning, we know that it's going to be hard to get source separation at the scale that we need. So maybe for an initial state, it's going to be maybe important to allow operators to also receive organic waste from industry, which, by the way, it's a huge also, there is a huge question mark, right? At least in some countries, on how much organic waste the private sector is generating, agro-industry, agriculture. We have very good or better information on municipal waste, urban waste in terms of generation, but not so much on what's being generated in industry. So there seems to be like a good opportunity also on that side. So I think, yeah, we need to work basically collaboratively in order to reduce the risks of the projects. So strong regulation, strengthening the contracting to include incentives. We want projects to be aligned with the climate goals of the countries. So in that sense, if we can provide incentives, for example, access to carbon markets, governments can be like a good support to open carbon markets to the private sector. So I think there are different strategies, but I think the key one is to reduce uncertainty and reduce risks for investments, and to ensure that in the long term there will be benefits for all parties.
Thanks, Gerardo. And your point on reducing the risk, I think that translates to before investment happen, before finance flows, there's a huge work on preparing the project itself, not only to make it investable, but also de-risking it in various fronts, like regulatory framework, like regulatory certainty. Some of it is about the market. It's not only about the market, but a lot of it is really to de-risk the financing risk. So people and from private sector or from multinational development banks can get in and then secure that financing to scale and also to pilot some of these projects. So thank you, Gerardo. And then to Severino, I think this is a sweet spot for us to talk about the ask from the waste pickers internationally on getting paid by service. We know that now it's really most of these projects with waste picker are getting paid by selling recyclables. Now with the organics, you mentioned that organics is not valued, right? And then we need to get the waste picker to get paid by service. So can you share us what are the thoughts that you have on getting waste picker finance to be paid, recognized by their service?
Eu tinha feito um comentário há alguns dias com o pessoal da Gaia e com a nossa colega da Global Methane Hub, que um dos objetivos principais para a gente nesse circuito é garantir que em cada cooperativa de catadores tenha, no mínimo, uma pequena composteira e tenha como orientar para as pessoas. A gente não está pensando especificamente no que vai gerar de mercado financeiro, que a gente sabe que não vai gerar. A gente sabe que não vai gerar porque os aspectos de mercado ele é muito complexo. Nenhum município quer fazer diminuição de tonelada do seu material. Todo município que eu conheço, e olha que eu viajo, viu? Eles estão mais interessados em economizar no sentido de que ele economiza e sobra mais para eles. Ninguém está preocupado. Ah, eu vou deixar de levar 10 toneladas de orgânico para o aterro sanitário. Ele quer levar mais. Todo mundo sabe que se tem um mercado que não é oficial, que não é justo, é essa relação contratual de empresa privada com município, com gestão pública. Não existe isso. Isso é uma ilusão. Hoje, o maior inimigo do conceito lixo zero são as gestões públicas. Eles não estão interessados em diminuir, eles estão interessados em como eles ganham mais e economizam mais para eles. Eles não estão preocupados em pegar o investimento, pegar o gasto, porque assim, porque a gente trabalha na internacional aqui. Se é um município ou uma gestão pública, ele tem um gasto de 100 toneladas para enterrar lixo, resíduo, que é muito material reciclável, ele pode manter como investimento produzindo com os catadores, com as organizações, fazendo uma separação e a destinação adequada. Eu estou preocupado porque o município está gastando 1 milhão e ele agora vai economizar 100 mil. Ele não está preocupado em economizar 100 mil. Não existe isso, senão a geração de resíduo não crescer. Eu estou entrando nesse caminho porque é muito simples. A gestão pública não está interessada em diminuir o resíduo. Ele quer cumprir programas importantes, legais, é isso que eu tento ser. O que os catadores hoje no mundo fazem é um trabalho muito bem feito. Há um ano que a gente está no posto de presidência da Aliança Internacional, tudo que a gente vem divulgando e falando com os catadores é: sejam o mais pragmático possível, faça um trabalho correto, organizado. Essa ideia de continuar trabalhando nos lixões, a gente tem que começar a rever, porque isso não é a bandeira de luta do trabalho dos catadores. Bandeira de luta é trabalho digno, transição justa, acesso aos materiais recicláveis e cobrar pelo pagamento do serviço. Porque senão a gente vai continuar numa roda em que eu tenho países, eu tenho organizações de catadores que já está reciclando plástico, como na Colômbia, e tem outros companheiros que ainda estão em Natal, que é a minha cidade, lá no chão, que estão na Ásia, que estão na Indonésia, milhares de catadores, milhões de catadores ainda nisso. Então, a nossa dicotomia hoje para a afirmação do projeto é: em cada cooperativa ter uma pequena composteira e ensinar os catadores a ensinar as pessoas a importância de destinar adequadamente o seu orgânico. Com isso, a gente vai ter números, vai ter especificidades, embora porque a preocupação maior é a visibilidade do trabalho. Quando a gente não tem visibilidade, vai vir startups, vai vir mega biodigestores, que a gente sabe que tem muito aí. Então, eu sou oriundo do mercado de carbono quando era a queima do metano para poder ganhar, fazer esse trabalhar, fazer dinheiro. Então, eu não penso muito na forma de como financiar o projeto. Tem que ter financiamento de organizações internacionais. É para isso que a gente apresenta bons resultados e apresenta formas de como trabalhar. Mas o nosso financiamento tem que vir de pagamento do serviço ambiental e sério e fazendo um bom serviço. É para isso que a gente que chegar a um ponto de que se uma municipalidade tem 50 mil pessoas, pode fazer o orgânico, aqui tem 5 milhões de pessoas, também pode tratar bem o seu orgânico.
Thank you, Severino. And yeah, I feel like our conversation today, we need more conversation. But it's good to see that there's things that are surfacing. Like there's a lot of actions happening on the ground. They deserve more financing. Even without financing, we are still doing implementation to make sure we deliver environmental services, not only from the project, from the private sector, from public sector, but also the waste speaker who's been organizing since a long time. So thank you, Gerardo. Thank you, Severino, for joining. We'll go to a breakout group session after this, and I'll pass it to Maka for now.
Thank you, Yobel, Gerardo, and Severino. Now, as Yobel mentioned, we are moving into the discussion part of this session. We'll go into breakout rooms. This is a great chance to connect, so please introduce yourselves, share where you're joining from and what kind of work you do. So each group will have access to a shared slide where you can write down the key challenges and opportunities you see from your sector's perspective when it comes to financing and scaling organic waste management. This is both a chance for networking and for contributing to the collective thinking of the hub. We encourage you to listen to each other and please note down your insights directly on the slides. We'll share the link here in the chat box. We'll come back together after around 10 minutes to briefly reflect. So let's get started. Hola. Bueno, thank you so much, everybody. Welcome back. We hope the conversations in your breakout room groups were insightful. Now we just have 5 minutes to open the floor and give some of you the chance to share what came up in your discussions, so you can share a challenge or an opportunity you identified in your group. You can also choose to express your thoughts using a few words to summarize your key takeaway or reflection. So please feel free to type it in the chat or raise your hand to speak. We'll keep it brief to hear from a few of you. So I welcome you if anybody wants to share what you spoke about in your breakout groups. You can raise your hand and also share your insights from the in the chat box. So we have Patricia from C40. Please go ahead and share the insights of your breakout groups.
Yeah, thank you, Macarena. I'll be brief and summarize what we discussed. So the first point that we saw was that there are small-scale innovators who would like to come up with initiatives, but there's a challenge of accessing funds for these small-scale practitioners. So that was the first challenge that we identified. The other challenge at city level is that even at national level, there's inadequate budgetary allocation, not only for organic waste diversion strategies, but waste as a whole, and even as we saw it as we began in the presentations. So that creates a challenge when we expect cities to come up with internal resource to come up with organic waste diversion technological options. Then the other challenge was a lack of streamlined organic waste diversion system or models within the city, so that it's ad hoc or, well, one or two practitioners or actors would come in and do it, but it's not scaled up to the citywide. And it's a challenge for them to scale up on that. Then the other challenge is, even with that, the streamlined system, there's no streamlined segregation at source. So we find that in homes, there's rich organic waste, but it causes more of a nuisance when it's not segregated, it's not collected on time. So those are the key challenges that we identified. Now, the opportunities is that we have organizations that are supporting green innovations and the finances are there. So it's upon now the cities, the national governments, the small-scale applicants to make an initiative to access these funds, to have the right proposals for these kind of funds that are available. Then we have the small-scale initiatives. We've just seen the case in South Africa where eThekwini, they started with one market, they've scaled up to the second market, they're going to the third market. So we have this opportunity of actors starting small, but progressively growing. And they are making meaningful, significant impact in terms of diverting organic waste in the city, as opposed to that decentralized system that we would want the city to do immediately. So those are some of the points that we brought out in our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for sharing. I'm going to also read some of the comments on the chat box. Marielle says that she's impressed that in her breakout group, everyone is involved in the implementation of organic waste management. There is a growing momentum that is very exciting. Severino is also sharing about the importance to create synergies between studies and implementation of the projects to make them accessible to waste speakers, so giving the appropriate visibility for their work. And we also have Kira. One great opportunity that came from our group is how important it is to bring together waste speakers and people working on organic waste diversion projects so that we can learn together and build a model for how waste speakers can be supported and be integrated into organic waste diversion. So thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your thoughts, for being here. All the challenges and opportunities you've identified today will be valuable inputs for the zero waste projects and advocacy that Gaia is moving forward globally. Special thanks to our panelists and speakers today, and to all of you for showing up and contributing to this collective effort. Thank you all, and we'll see you at the next session of the Global Action Hub on Waste, Methane, and Environmental Justice. You can already register through the link on the chat box. So until then, take care and let's keep the momentum going. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Obrigado,
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
separatists.
Muchas gracias.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Obrigado.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Mariel.
Bye, Severino.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Severino. Obrigado.
Thank you so much.